She thought it was a career opportunity. By the time the door locked behind her, she realized she'd walked into a trap where the only way out was through her darkest fears. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and Lisa thought it was spam at first. An all-expenses-paid weekend retreat at a mountain resort designed for young professionals looking to expand their network and learn from successful entrepreneurs. The sender was someone she'd met briefly at a conference 6 months ago, a guy named David who worked in the same industry. He said the host was looking for ambitious people, and he immediately thought of her. Lisa was 31 and working as a freelance graphic designer. The past year had been tough. Clients were harder to find, and she'd been feeling stuck in her career. This retreat promised workshops on personal branding, connections with potential clients, and a chance to reset. The resort looked beautiful in the photos, nestled between mountains with huge windows overlooking forests. Everything was covered, including meals and accommodation. All she had to do was show up. She called David to make sure it was legitimate. He sounded excited, telling her he'd been to one of these events before, and it changed his perspective on business. He said the host, a man named Gregory Chen, was incredible at helping people break through their mental blocks. Lisa felt reassured. David seemed normal enough, and she desperately needed something to jumpstart her motivation. Friday evening came quickly. Lisa drove 3 hours into the mountains, following GPS directions that took her further and further from civilization. The road got narrower, winding through tall pine trees as the sun began to set. She started wondering if she'd made a mistake, but then the lodge appeared around a bend. It was even more impressive in person, a massive wooden structure with warm lights glowing from inside. About 20 people were already there when she arrived, mingling in the main hall with glasses of wine and small plates of fancy appetizers. Everyone seemed friendly and normal. There were entrepreneurs, consultants, a teacher, someone who worked in software, and a journalist. They all had similar stories about receiving invitations through colleagues or friends. The atmosphere felt relaxed, almost like a wedding reception. Gregory appeared around 7 o'clock. He was in his 40s, well-dressed in casual, expensive clothes. With an easy smile and confident handshake, he welcomed everyone and explained the weekend's purpose. They would be doing exercises designed to help them connect authentically, break down the walls people build in professional settings, and discover what truly drives them. He talked about vulnerability and courage, about how most people never reach their potential because they're afraid to be real. It all sounded reasonable to Lisa. She'd read similar things in self-help books and heard motivational speakers say the same. Everyone nodded along, excited to begin. Then Gregory asked everyone to hand over their phones. He explained that constant connectivity was the enemy of deep work and genuine connection. For the weekend, they would experience true presence without the distraction of screens. A few people hesitated, but Gregory's assistant brought out a lockbox, assuring everyone their devices would be safe, and returned Sunday evening. One by one, people dropped their phones in. Lisa felt a small knot in her stomach but told herself it was just withdrawal anxiety. She added hers to the pile. The first evening session started after dinner. They sat in a circle in the main room, a fire crackling in the stone fireplace. Gregory began with simple questions. What brought you here? What do you hope to gain? People shared their struggles, their dreams, their frustrations with their careers and lives. It felt good. Actually, Lisa found herself opening up about feeling directionless, about how she compared herself to others on social media, about the fear that she'd wasted her potential. But as the night went on, the questions got more personal. Gregory asked about childhood experiences, about relationships with parents, about moments of shame or failure. Some people cried, others laughed nervously. Lisa noticed how Gregory seemed to know exactly what to ask, how to push just a little further each time. By midnight, she felt emotionally drained. When people started heading to their rooms, Lisa tried the front door, thinking she'd step outside for fresh air. It was locked. She assumed it was for security and didn't think much of it. The weekend was just beginning, and she was tired. She found her assigned room upstairs, a cozy space with a comfortable bed. As she lay there trying to sleep, she heard muffled crying from the room next door. Someone else was having a harder time with the evening's intensity. Lisa told herself it was normal. Personal growth was supposed to be uncomfortable. That's what all the books said. But something felt off in a way she couldn't quite name. The door had closed behind them when they arrived, and now she realized she hadn't seen anyone leave, not even for a walk. She pushed the thought away and eventually fell into an uneasy sleep, unaware that tomorrow would reveal the true nature of what she'd walked into. Morning came with a knock on the door. Breakfast was served downstairs at 8 sharp, Gregory's assistant announced through the hallway. Lisa dressed quickly and joined the others in the dining room. The food was impressive. A full spread of pastries, fruits, eggs, and coffee. But the mood felt different from the night before. People were quieter, more guarded. The vulnerability of the previous evening had left everyone feeling exposed. Gregory arrived after everyone had eaten. He clapped his hands together with enthusiasm and announced that the real work was about to begin. He explained that they weren't just at a networking retreat. This was something more important, something that could genuinely change their lives. He called it an intensive personal development experiment, designed to strip away the masks people wear and help them discover their authentic selves. Lisa felt her stomach drop. This wasn't what the invitation had described. She glanced around the room and saw confusion on other faces too. A woman named Patricia, the teacher, raised her hand and asked if they could opt out if they weren't comfortable. Gregory smiled patiently and said that growth only happens outside comfort zones. He reminded them that they'd all signed detailed waivers when they registered online, agreeing to participate fully in all activities. Lisa vaguely remembered clicking through some documents when she signed up, but she'd barely read them. Who actually reads those things? Now she wished she had. The morning session began with Gregory dividing them into pairs. He called them accountability partners. Each pair had to sit facing each other and answer questions Gregory provided. Taking turns. The questions started innocuously enough but quickly became invasive. What's your biggest regret? When did you last lie to someone you love? What do you hide from the world? Lisa was paired with James, the journalist. They both felt awkward at first, but as they answered, something strange happened. The forced intimacy created a false sense of closeness. After an hour, Lisa felt like she knew James better than friends she'd had for years. But it also felt wrong, like they'd been tricked into revealing things too quickly. After lunch, Gregory gathered everyone again. He announced that transparency was the foundation of authentic connection, and they would be practicing radical honesty for the remainder of the weekend. From now on, they had to say exactly what they were thinking and feeling, no matter how uncomfortable. Anyone caught being dishonest or evasive would face consequences. Lisa's unease grew. What kind of consequences? Gregory didn't elaborate. The afternoon brought group exercises that pushed boundaries further. They had to stand in front of everyone and share their deepest insecurity while the group remained silent. Just staring. One man broke down crying, talking about how his father never believed in him. A younger woman shared about her eating struggles. Lisa's turn came, and she found herself talking about feeling like a failure, about watching everyone else succeed while she stayed stuck. The silence afterward felt crushing. Then David, the friend who'd invited her, stood up during his turn and said something that made Lisa's blood run cold. He apologized to the group for recruiting them. He explained that he'd been paid to find people who fit certain profiles, people who were vulnerable or searching for something. Gregory had asked him to target individuals who seemed uncertain about their path, who might be more susceptible to influence. The room erupted in angry voices. Several people stood up, demanding to leave immediately. Gregory remained calm. He said the doors were locked for everyone's safety and to prevent people from running away from necessary discomfort. He claimed everything was legal, that the waivers gave him the right to conduct his research, and that anyone who tried to leave early would be sued for breach of contract. He'd also be forced to share video footage of everything they'd revealed with their employers and families. Lisa looked around frantically. Cameras. She hadn't noticed them before, but now she saw small lenses positioned throughout the room. They'd been recording everything. Patricia, the teacher, started crying. The software developer, A quiet woman named Nina walked to the door and tried to force it open. It wouldn't budge. Two large men, Gregory's assistants, stepped forward and firmly guided her back to her seat. They weren't rough, but the message was clear. Nobody was leaving. Gregory's voice remained steady as he explained that this was all part of the process. Resistance was normal. By Sunday, they would understand and thank him. Some people just needed more time to embrace the journey. Lisa felt panic rising in her chest. This wasn't a retreat. It was a trap, and they'd all walked right into it. By the third day, something disturbing had happened to the group. They'd split into two camps. Some people, like Patricia and a corporate lawyer named Robert, had started defending Gregory. They called him a visionary, said his methods were just misunderstood. They claimed they were experiencing real breakthroughs and that the resistant people were just too afraid to grow. Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. These were the same people who'd been upset about being trapped here. But after another night of intense sessions where Gregory praised those who participated fully and criticized those who held back, something had shifted in their minds. It reminded Lisa of stories she'd read about cults, about how quickly normal people could be manipulated under the right conditions. The exercises had escalated. Gregory made them act out painful memories from childhood, with other participants playing the roles of parents, or bullies, or whoever had hurt them. Lisa was forced to relive a moment when she'd been excluded by friends in school, with Patricia deliberately playing the mean girl who'd rejected her. It brought up emotions she'd buried for years, and afterward, she felt both exhausted and strangely attached to Patricia, even though Patricia had just been cruel to her in the role play. That's when Lisa understood what was happening. Gregory was using psychological techniques to break down their defenses and rebuild their thinking. The intensity, the lack of privacy, the sleep deprivation from late-night sessions, the emotional manipulation. It was all designed to make them dependent on him and each other in unhealthy ways. James found her in the hallway after lunch on day 3. He whispered that he'd been secretly watching patterns. Gregory targeted people who showed independence or skepticism, putting them in scenarios designed to humiliate or emotionally overwhelm them. Meanwhile, he rewarded compliance with praise and special treatment. Robert and Patricia now got extra privileges, better food, and Gregory's approval. Everyone else noticed, and some started changing their behavior to gain those same rewards. Lisa and James decided they needed to find others who were still clear-headed. They identified Nina, the software developer, and an older man named Frank, who'd been a teacher for 30 years before retiring. The four of them began meeting quietly whenever possible, pretending to go along with Gregory's program while actually planning. But Gregory seemed to notice everything. That evening, he introduced something new: consequence sessions. The group would vote on who wasn't fully participating, and that person would face a penalty. It could be isolation in their room for 24 hours, missing meals, or being excluded from the group while everyone else continued. The first vote targeted James. Robert accused him of being dishonest during the exercises, of holding back. Patricia agreed enthusiastically. Others, scared of being targeted themselves, went along. James was sent to his room with no dinner, not allowed to interact with anyone until the next evening. Lisa felt sick. They were turning on each other, exactly like Gregory wanted. She tried to speak up for James, but Gregory cut her off, saying her defensiveness suggested she wasn't being honest about her own feelings. Was she avoiding her own growth by focusing on protecting others? The question was designed to make her doubt herself, and terrifyingly, it worked for a moment. That night, Nina managed to find the maintenance room. She had an engineering background and thought maybe she could override the electronic locks. Lisa kept watch while Nina examined the system. It was complex, designed to be controlled from Gregory's private office. They'd need his access code or to disable the main power, which would trigger backup systems they didn't understand. They were running out of time and options. Frank suggested they needed evidence of what was happening. If they could somehow record Gregory's real intentions or document the coercion, they might have legal protection later. But their phones were locked away, and the cameras only recorded for Gregory's use. Then Lisa remembered James was a journalist. Before coming here, He probably had habits that might help. When he was released from his room the next day, she managed to whisper a question. Did he have any recording equipment with him? James's eyes lit up slightly. He nodded almost imperceptibly. He'd hidden a small audio recorder in the lining of his jacket, a habit from years of investigative work. It was old school, not digital. So it didn't get detected when they collected phones. Now they had a chance. But they needed Gregory to say something incriminating, and they needed a way out. The weekend was supposed to end on Sunday evening. Just 2 more days, but Lisa had overheard Gregory's assistants talking. He'd extended it. He was telling people outside that the retreat was going so well, they'd added extra days. Nobody was coming to rescue them. They had to save themselves. Sunday morning brought a breaking point. One of the participants, a young man named Kyle, was found in his bathroom by Frank. He'd been struggling more than anyone, and the pressure had become too much. He'd hurt himself, not severely, but enough that he needed medical attention. Frank, who had first aid training from decades of teaching, immediately started helping him while yelling for others. Gregory appeared, but instead of calling for medical help, he tried to frame it as part of Kyle's breakthrough process. He said Kyle was releasing pain, that this was actually a positive sign of walls coming down. Patricia and Robert nodded along, but even they looked uncertain now. Lisa felt rage building. This had gone from manipulation to genuinely dangerous. Frank refused to back down. He said Kyle needed a hospital, and if Gregory didn't let them take him, Frank would testify against him later. The threat seemed to shake something in Gregory. He'd been so confident, so in control. But now his mask slipped. His face darkened, and he said something revealing. If any of them spoke about what happened here, he would destroy them. He had footage of everyone at their most vulnerable, saying and doing things they'd be ashamed to have public. He had enough material to ruin careers, relationships, and reputations. The waivers they signed gave him ownership of all content created during the retreat. James's hidden recorder was running in his pocket. He'd been carrying it everywhere since Lisa told him they needed evidence. While Frank stabilized Kyle, Nina saw her chance. In the chaos, Gregory's assistants were distracted. She'd been studying the building's layout and remembered seeing an old breaker box in the basement. If she could cut certain circuits, it might unlock the magnetic seals on some doors without triggering the backup systems. It was a guess based on how she'd seen similar setups configured, but it was their best shot. Lisa created a diversion by suddenly confronting Patricia loudly about how she could defend someone who was keeping them prisoner while a person needed medical help. Others joined in, and the room erupted in arguments. In the confusion, Nina slipped away. 5 minutes later, the lights flickered. Some overhead fixtures went out, and Lisa heard a clicking sound from the main entrance. Nina had done it. Lisa caught James's eye and then Frank's. They moved toward Kyle, with Frank supporting him. Robert tried to block them, still defending Gregory. But Frank was a large man, and simply pushed past. The front door was unlocked. Lisa burst through first, then helped Frank get Kyle outside. The morning air felt like freedom. James and Nina followed. Behind them, they heard Gregory shouting orders to his assistants to stop them. They ran to the parking area. Lisa's car was closest. She fumbled with her keys, hands shaking, and got the doors open. Kyle was semi-conscious but stable. They all piled in, and Lisa started driving down the mountain road as fast as she dared on the winding path. James called emergency services once they had cell signal. He explained there was a medical emergency and also a potential criminal situation with people being held against their will. The dispatcher kept him on the line, and police were dispatched to both meet them and go to the lodge. At the hospital, Kyle was treated and stabilized. The police took statements from all of them. James played his recording, which captured Gregory's threats clearly. The officers' expressions grew serious as they listened. This wasn't just a weird self-help retreat gone wrong. This was false imprisonment, coercion, and possibly practicing psychology without proper licensing. When police raided the lodge later that day, they found a disturbing scene. Gregory was trying to delete files from his computer. Patricia and Robert were helping him, still convinced they were protecting someone who'd helped them. The other participants were in various states of confusion and distress. Some had been there so long under such intense psychological pressure that they weren't sure what was real anymore. The investigation revealed Gregory had done this before. 3 other retreats over the past 2 years, each time with participants too traumatized or legally frightened to report what happened. He'd been building a database of footage and information, supposedly for a research paper on influence and persuasion, but he'd been kicked out of his psychology program years ago for ethical issues, and none of this was legitimate research. The aftermath was complicated in ways Lisa never expected. The legal case took months to build. Gregory's lawyers argued that everything was consensual, that the waivers were valid, and that he'd simply been conducting an intensive workshop. But James's recording, combined with testimonies from Lisa, Frank, Nina, and eventually others, built a strong case. The key was proving that consent had been manufactured through deception and maintained through coercion and threats. Kyle's medical emergency became crucial evidence. Gregory's refusal to provide immediate medical care demonstrated that participant safety wasn't his priority. Prosecutors charged him with false imprisonment, practicing psychology without a license, assault relating to the psychological harm caused, and fraud for misrepresenting the nature of the retreat. But the criminal case was only one part of the aftermath. Lisa struggled with nightmares and anxiety for months. Simple things triggered her, like receiving emails from unknown senders, or being in rooms with locked doors. She started therapy, which helped, but the experience had shaken something fundamental in her sense of safety and trust. The group stayed in touch, which was both helpful and complicated. They'd bonded through trauma, which created a unique connection, but being around each other also reminded them of the worst weekend of their lives. They formed a group chat to share updates on the case and support each other through the healing process. Patricia and Robert's situations were heartbreaking. Even after everything came to light, they struggled to accept that they'd been manipulated. Patricia insisted for weeks that Gregory had helped her, and that the others were overreacting. It took extensive therapy for her to understand how the psychological techniques had affected her thinking. Robert eventually came around but felt deep shame about how he'd turned on other participants. The trial attracted media attention. Stories about the retreat went viral online, sparking debates about consent, the self-help industry, and how ordinary people can be manipulated in isolated situations. Lisa was approached by journalists wanting interviews. At first, she refused, wanting privacy to heal. But James, using his media connections, helped her understand that telling the story publicly might prevent others from falling into similar traps. She gave one interview, carefully explaining what happened without sensationalizing it. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out, sharing their own experiences with manipulative workshops, retreats, or groups. Lisa realized this wasn't an isolated incident. There was a whole industry of unregulated personal development programs, some legitimate, but others dangerous. The trial concluded with Gregory being found guilty on multiple charges. He was sentenced to prison time and ordered to pay damages to the participants. More importantly, the case led to new scrutiny of the personal development industry. Several states began considering regulations requiring proper licensing and oversight for intensive psychological programs. Lisa slowly rebuilt her life. The experience had changed her, no doubt about that. She was more cautious now, more aware of manipulation tactics, less trusting of people who promised easy transformations. But she also discovered strength she didn't know she had. She'd survived something terrible and come out the other side. She started speaking at events about psychological safety and coercion. Her background in design helped her create clear, accessible resources about warning signs of manipulative groups and programs. It became a new direction for her career, turning the worst experience of her life into something that might protect others. Frank retired from his part-time teaching and began volunteering with organizations that helped people exit high-control groups. Nina used her technical skills to help build better security and oversight systems for retreat centers that wanted to prove they were operating ethically. James wrote an investigative series about unregulated personal development programs that won journalism awards and sparked policy discussions. Kyle's recovery took the longest. The experience had broken something in him that required years of careful therapy to repair. But eventually, he found stability and even started a support group for survivors of psychological manipulation. The door had closed that Friday evening, trapping them in a nightmare. But when they finally escaped, they'd also opened doors for others. The case created legal precedents. The publicity educated people about risks. The survivors became advocates. Lisa often thought about how close she'd come to dismissing her instincts that first night. The small knot in her stomach when she handed over her phone. The unease when the door was locked. The feeling that something was wrong. She'd almost talked herself out of trusting those feelings. Now she knew better. Intuition exists for a reason. When something feels off, it usually is. Years later, she still got emails from people who'd read about the case or heard her speak. They thanked her for warning them away from similar programs or helped them recognize manipulation they were currently experiencing. Each message reminded her that speaking up had been worth it, even when it was difficult. The story became a cautionary tale but also a story of resilience. 20 people walked into that lodge, seeking growth and connection. What they found instead was manipulation and control. But some of them fought back, escaped, and held someone accountable. They proved that even when boundaries are crossed and power is abused, people can still reclaim their agency and protect others. The door closed that weekend, but they opened it again, and they made sure everyone could see what had been hidden behind it.